As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
There's no crying in baseball!
I ate his liver with some fava beans and my skinny
That was totally wicked!
If I can change, and you can change, everybody can change!
And welcome to another episode of Your Next Favorite Movie. I'm your host, Josh G. And today I am joined by the author of two books. Zach Morris lied 329 times, if I'm remembering correctly. And Talk 90s with me, his latest book. Please welcome Matt Pais to the show.
Hey, Josh. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely, Matt. And I guess my first question would be, if you're thinking back to the 90s, what's something that's nostalgic for you?
Oh, that's a great question. There are so many things. Certainly, it is quite obvious for those books that I've put out that I have a lot of interest in the 90s still, and that was very much the decade when I first became excited about pop culture, and we know that that era hasn't gone away at all. It's really amazing how much those properties have either been rebooted or come back in some way, and even if they haven't, there's still so much ongoing conversation about a lot of that material that is shocking, but also understandable for several reasons. But in terms of what I'm nostalgic for, something that I couldn't help but mentioning at the top of a few of the interviews in the book, since I always started each discussion by asking the subject something they missed from the 90s, as well as a movie or show that they liked that they weren't in. It was hard not to go back to the physical media conversation, standing in Best Buy or Tower Records or something and saying, oh, I have $15 to spend. Do I want the CD? Am I willing to invest in this? It probably sounds silly now, but those were oddly formative moments. I'm sure you can look back on things like that and realize that feels strangely special as people grow up and start caring about pop culture.
I absolutely can. And I mean, I still go into Best Buy some days and I'll go to their Blu-ray section. That's what I like to look at anyway. And it's just so small now, like DVD and Blu-ray. It's just like one shelf front and back, and that's about it. And I'm like, it used to be like rows, and I would just walk up and down. I could spend hours just looking through. And I mean, yeah. So yeah, I completely understand that. Right, so you talked about, I mean, obviously you love the 90s, so that's where it came from. But how'd you get this idea that you wanted to write these books?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I had spent 11 years as the movie critic for the Chicago Tribune's Red Eye and loved the work I got to do there. I wrote more than 2,000 reviews. I interviewed hundreds of people and was just so lucky to be in that role. And then after I changed jobs and moved into something not based in entertainment, I thought it would be fun to just try to pursue that interest on the side a little bit. And for the Zach Morris book, once I got the idea in my head to count the number of times that he lied throughout the series and do a statistical analysis of the whole series, counting a few other elements too, and putting some numbers to the treatment of Jesse and just doing a really fun breakdown of the show, I sort of felt like, well, now that I've thought of this, I have to do it. I can't not do it. Saved by the Bell was the show that I knew probably the best from that time, and I just thought that would be a really fun project to take on. And I was able to also talk to 22 cast members from that show and include interviews in that book. And even if certain people might not be known on the street, if you go up and ask someone about Eddie Garcia or something like that, if you talk to a Saved by the Bell fan about Johnny Dakota or Nurse Jennifer or characters like that, those people, even just in an episode, made a huge impact. So it was great to talk to people involved with the show for that book. And then for this newer book, Talk 90s with Me, I thought it would be fun to broaden beyond one show and really just cast a wide net to people that I thought were worth talking to for performances worth remembering, and material that was still worth reflecting on. And this is by no means to say these are all of the best movies and shows or the only ones to care about. Hardly. Very much filtered through my own experience. this was an opportunity to, most importantly, ask people questions that they had not been asked before. There's really no reason to do a book like this and just go through the motions and have people try out the same old answers to the same old questions. So it was one of my favorite parts of the role of interviewer is the research of watching, listening, reading to all the things that have been done before and doing the absolute best you can to come up with new angles and just have a really open, great conversation that feels new and not just recycled. So none of these interviews were set up in a way that agreed upon like how much time it was going to be or anything. So the fact that they averaged about 60 to 75 minutes and went to all these really great, open, intimate places, but that was always intended to be accessible, fun, and thought-provoking all at once. With people like Tom Everett Scott of That Thing You Do, Ariana Richards of Jurassic Park, Amy Jo Johnson of Power Rangers and Felicity, Dougie Doug from Cool Runnings, Karen Parsons from The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. It was just so great to see who was interested and take it from there.
Okay. Yeah, I was curious about how your process went of lining these interviews up, but I guess it comes from your background as a film critic too. You already had some connections through that, I guess, at least in some part.
Yeah, I was grateful to be able to use IMDb Pro, which includes the contact information for people's representatives. And really just, it wasn't complicated. I would reach out and identify myself, explain that my new book was a collection of interviews with stars of movies and shows from the 90s. And definitely there would have been a way to do this where you would have just kind of reached out to anyone, but I didn't want to do that because that winds up including material that isn't beloved or that isn't worth discussing or people that were sort of on the sidelines. As you can tell from my list of some of the people I spoke with, this isn't a book that has Tom Hanks and Julia Roberts and Tom Cruise or something, but it doesn't have to be. That's not the only way to remember the 90s by any means. There are so many impactful and influential pieces from that period that people cared about then and still care about now. And it doesn't have to be the most famous people in the world to be able to access them. But it was very important to me to connect with people who were either the star or a really memorable, impactful character, because that's the way that we want to be able to revisit this material and come up with a new way to think about it and consider it, not just by saying, hey, you were party goer number 6.
Right.
That's not going to lead to anything.
But that does make me wonder, is there one or two that you could say that you were close to getting, but like the one that got away, if you will?
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. And my best answer to that question is I was surprised by every single person's response. I was surprised when someone said yes. I was surprised when someone said no. There were some people I thought that would definitely be up for it that weren't. And there were some that I really, really didn't think would happen that did. Reaching out for William Daniels, best known to 90s kids as Mr. Feeney on Boy Meets World, despite being in The Graduate and having all kinds of other credits, of course. He's in his mid-90s. I didn't necessarily assume that would happen by any means, but I spoke with him as well as his wife, Bonnie Bartlett, who he does his interviews with. And it was just a really great variety of people, to some Megan Cavanaugh from A League of Their Own, and Luke Edwards from Newsies and Little Big League, and just really rolling the dice. And all you have to do is ask and see what happens.
Yeah, and I don't know if you ran into this, but I know for me personally, when reaching out, I think the worst thing is just the no response. I'd rather be told no than just almost just be ignored, basically.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's, of course, you hope that anyone you reach out to will say yes, but it's necessary to be persistent. So someone who says no after the first or second try is saving you the third, fourth, and fifth email after a week or two pass by. So, but it comes with the territory, and by definition, and that was something that I certainly recognize is quite a lot different than what my role used to be, where because of my previous full-time job, being sent to a suite in a hotel room, which is set up by the studio and the publicity team locally, where you have 15 to 20 minutes and are really trying to do the best you can in that short amount of time. And I loved the challenge of utilizing that, and especially for the video interviews that I did as well. But to be able to flesh things out over an hour or even an hour and a half, some of these as long as that, it's obvious that you can just build out. I mean, I put on the back cover that this book was very much meant to feel like getting a drink with the stars of these movies and shows, or just the kind of long phone call that people used to have a lot in the 90s, but probably don't have as much anymore. I very much wanted to feel like a conversation as opposed to an interview, and I'm really proud that that's how it turned out.
Yeah, and something I noticed, and I don't know if this was for all of them, but it seemed like some of these were like legitimate phone calls, not like Zoom meetings, but legitimate phone calls on a phone. Just by the way it was worded, it seemed like that.
Oh, absolutely. All except for one were just on the phone.
Wow. Okay. And I noticed through a lot of the conversations, you did this during the pandemic. So do you think that helped you? Like, it's like to have a pandemic, but people end up with a lot more free time, so they were able to actually contribute to your book. Do you think that helped?
Possibly. Certainly, every single person had such an individual experience, has had such an individual experience over the past few years and ongoing. But I think that makes a lot of sense that the availability changed during that time, of course. And really just the way that people, of course, reflect on things from 30 years ago, as opposed to talking about a project that they did a year ago or something, in most cases allows them to be really honest and appreciative, but also willing to think critically about certain things. And even if certain things have or haven't aged well, just be able to really bring fresh eyes to it. I totally appreciate that some people are somewhat protective about material from their childhood. I've always felt like, for better or worse, I can look at things pretty objectively, and that even if there's something that I loved then and might think about differently now because I'm much older than when I saw it at the time, I'm okay with that. And I'm thankful that I had these opportunities and proud of the way that my experience allowed me to go into these situations and be able to ask a number of hard questions, approach things that can be sensitive, but do it in a way that is respectful and really drew out a great dialogue.
Yeah. And just to plug my own show, I'll reference people to go back to an episode we did over the summer. I left the 90s. I went back further to the 80s and got Andre Gower from the Monster Squad. Did you watch the Monster Squad growing up?
I didn't, no.
Oh, no. Such a great movie. I highly suggest you check that out. Like, we got to sit down and spend 3 hours with him. Like, he was very giving of his time. Yeah, very giving. All right, but one of the interviews, and I figure we'll talk about it in this next part, was with one Shane McDermott, and not exactly a household name, but as a kid growing up, you took us back to 1993. And we're going to put on our skates and we're going to go rollerblading as we get airborne.
T-minus 3, 2, 1.
Fasten your seatbelt.
When you got a perfect wave, a perfect anything, you go for it.
Nicky!
And get ready for the ride of your life.
Stay away from my sister. You know, you were the first smiling face I've seen in 3 weeks.
Leave gravity behind and get Airborne. Rated PG. Starts Friday, September 17th.
All right, Matt. So why don't you tell us, when did you first see Airborne?
Yeah, I was trying to remember that. It's so funny when you think of some of the things you encounter as a kid. There's some movies or shows that I think people probably can really timestamp or connect to a specific experience, like if they saw it in the theater. Seeing Jurassic Park in the theater, for example, for me and probably for a lot of people, was very memorable. Airborne, I think I just somehow encountered it on TV one time, and then I don't remember not knowing about it which seems like a ridiculous thing to say about a movie that is, I guess, more obscure on the
Right.
on the grand scheme of the way that the 90s are remembered. It's not streaming. You can rent it for a couple bucks on YouTube, but it's something that has really just sort of faded from memory, I think, for a lot of people, even though, I don't know if you saw this, Josh, for the 30th anniversary of Airborne this year, there seems to be a convention being put together
Oh,
to
wow. I
celebrate
have
it
not.
in Cincinnati
Of
in
course.
late 2023, where the movie's set. So that's exciting that some
That
people are
is.
trying to keep that conversation alive. But I think it must have been just one of those movies on HBO or Showtime or something that I came across as a teenager, and really it just clicked. Which I'm not a surfer at all. I had rollerblades at the time, which I used sparingly, but it wasn't because of some personal connection to that. I mean, we'll get into why I think I responded to it so much, but it's just funny the things that stick out to you, and then to kind of zoom out and say, well, why do I think I like this? What do you remember about seeing it?
I can't pinpoint a first time either, but I know that once I saw it, I had a cousin. He's 3 years younger than I am, but we used to rent this movie a lot. I don't know why, because it's like you said, I'm nowhere. I'm 4 or 5 hours from the closest beach, so I didn't grow up surfing or anything. Yeah, I did some rollerblading as well. I don't even think I was rollerblading yet though when I saw this, because I was probably 9 or 10. But yeah, I remember renting this on VHS a ton, but I couldn't tell you the first encounter. It might have been like you said on HBO or something. And then when I went to the video store, I started picking it up. But yeah, that would be how I encountered Airborne.
Sure. Yeah, and like you said, Shane McDermott, for people who know this movie, is a very memorable, important person of a movie that I'm not claiming is one of the greatest movies of all time, or necessarily one of the best movies of the 90s, but it's really endearing, and I do think holds up because of the really unique vibe that it is able to achieve, and the way this is far from the only movie about being yourself and sort of picking your battles as you figure out your life as a teenager and going through the steps of a coming of age story. But Airborne deals with that in a way that I do think is different from a lot of other movies that you can put in that category. And I think it's a shame that people generally, I think, disregarded it so much at the time, making almost no money, and then over the years just sort of falling by the wayside. And Shane McDermott is such a crucial part of this movie, and exactly cast right for the lead role as Mitchell Guzin. And I was so excited that I got to speak with him for the book, and he was just so warm and excited to go back to that time, but also think differently about some things, and really that was exciting, and that is a really great representation of not one of the biggest stars by any means that I spoke with for the book, but a real sign that people who like to look back at the 90s and who want to put a new spin on their nostalgia, that's someone that absolutely can be important to them. But just because it's not Tom Hanks doesn't mean it can't feel really rewarding and thoughtful and entertaining.
Right. And I'll tell you this. I was telling my wife about this episode. I was like, did you ever watch Airborne? And I showed her the poster. She's like, I don't think I ever saw that, but I know that guy. I think I remember him on like Teen Beat or something, because I mean, he was popular for a minute. And I know you even talk about in the book, The Swans Crossing. I have no idea what that is. I didn't know anything about it, but apparently
Yeah,
he
I
was
didn't
in a bunch
either.
of that.
I had no familiarity with that show beforehand, which seems to have led to his lead role in Airborne. But yeah, there and that was like the case of people not having access to everything at all times anywhere in the 90s. So it's pretty funny to discover properties that whether they had a couple seasons or many, to say, wow, I had no idea that this existed at all.
Yeah, never heard of it. But let's talk about why you wanted to choose this movie. I mean, obviously, it's not your top tippy top favorite movie, but it is a favorite from yours of this decade, of your favorite decade, obviously. So what made you want to talk about Airborne today?
Sure. So when I think about Airborne does really well, I think about the fact that it's set towards the end of high school, just to set up the plot for anyone who have never saw it or never remembered it. It's just about this guy who is totally living it up in California, doesn't have a care in the world. All he wants to do is just go out in the sun, rollerblade to the beach, spend the rest of the day surfing, and go home and do the same thing the next day. And then his parents get an opportunity to study the Australian wombat on location. And because they think that their son can't be out of school that long, or I guess go to school in Australia, and clearly they don't have any local family in LA or any other friends to stay with, all sorts of logical jumps that we'll move past. He is sent to Cincinnati to stay with his aunt and uncle and cousin, the latter of whom is played by Seth Green. Apparently he hasn't seen these people since he and his cousin were in diapers yet. Right. This is the place that he's sent to nearly 20 years later for 6 months. And Cincinnati, he discovers, to no one's surprise, is a much different place than LA. And aside from the fact that they value hockey and think surfing is not a real sport, they also just don't take to his mentality, his confidence. And I set all this up to talk about the ways that I think no matter what your high school experience was like, I think everyone would agree that that is a period of life that is just inherently chaotic. There's so much development going on, so much uncertainty. Everyone is just figuring it out. And the ways in which Airborne brings like a sense of peace and calm to a really chaotic time, while also zeroing in on a character who, as Mitchell explains in a really great scene with Nikki, played by Brittany Powell, he used to fight for everything and be just as aggressive as some of the guys who are going after him at the Cincinnati high school. And he learned a hard lesson that really made him question, like, why is that worth it? Why am I doing this when I can approach life differently and not think that everything is for me, or think that I need to have a problem with somebody else. And that demeanor really clashes with the people in Cincinnati, and the ways in which that plays out at times can feel formulaic or ridiculous. But overall, I think it does a lot of things really well and has a lot of great moments and great quotes. Aside from an awesome, like shockingly long ending sequence of a race down Devil's Backbone, that it's way more memorable and way more entertaining and even thoughtful than I think a lot of people give it credit for.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up Devil's Backbone, because I really thought that part of it came up earlier in the movie where they talk about Devil's Backbone and lead up to that. And watching it over this time, I was like, nope, that's brought up with 20 minutes left and you're there. And I was like, oh my goodness, thought this was a much bigger part, but it is an awesome sequence. All right, Matt, this is where we're getting into the fun territory. And I want to know your thoughts on what you would like to see. And in your book, you kind of bring it up in a way. So I want to see if you go with a sequel back in the 90s, or you kind of brought up a legacy sequel in a way, I noticed in your interview with him. So how would you like to see that taken?
Sure. Yeah, I was thinking, could there be a sequel to Airborne? How would that be done best? I mean, if I had to really say, should there be one? Arguably not. But if they were to do one, it would probably have to be set in either California, definitely not Cincinnati. Maybe they would set it in California and bring Wiley over, have kind of the reverse thing happen. Instead of Wiley helping Mitchell acclimate to Cincinnati, maybe Mitchell could help Wiley acclimate to LA. Or as you're referring to, at this point, it would probably have to be something where it was like Mitchell's son or something like that, and maybe they go to a different country or explore. Maybe they go to Australia. Maybe this is when they switch and the parents happen to be in the U.S. or something, and everyone goes to Australia. But yeah, it's funny to think. At this point, nothing is off the table. I would be very surprised if an Airborne sequel came along, but never say never.
Yeah, that's always why I normally just phrase it in the "What would you have liked to have seen?" But since you literally brought up in the interview rollerblading dads or whatever it was called, I was like, oh, that kind of fits as a legacy sequel if you call it that.
I think you could get some people to pull that movie up for sure.
Okay, well, let's talk about what's the more likely scenario. Well, I don't know how likely it is for a movie like this, but you never know. And that's if they decided to do the remake. Who would you like to see in some of these roles?
I love this challenge, Josh. It was hard, and I'm sure if I took more time to think about it, I would come up with more people and some differences. So for Mitchell Guzin, and disclaimer as well that I'm somewhat disregarding ages. As we know, high school kids are often played by people in their late 20s, if not sometimes even older than that, which is pushing it. But I feel like Timothée Chalamet is probably a good choice for Mitchell. He's shown himself to be really versatile. And even though I think he can be really good as someone who is more forward, I guess, than Mitchell's character is, or I don't even know if that's the best word for it, but I think he would do a great job embracing sort of the laid back mentality, but also responding to the challenges that he experiences, and also bringing, I mean, I touch on it a little, but I actually think the romance here is handled pretty nicely. It's not a huge part of the movie, but it matters. And Nikki is a character that we don't necessarily learn a ton about, aside from the delayed reveal that she is the sister of one of the people who's bullying Mitchell the most. But I'm always appreciative of when a character can be created, and this comes from sort of efficient writing and also the performance of someone who is, for lack of a better word, just kind of a kind person, but who doesn't feel bland. And I think you get the sense when Mitchell and Nikki meet each other, just that she responds to who he is in that great discussion they have at the ice rink. You know, when he lists the things that he likes, and some people might find it corny, but she says, "Oh, you're a poet," and he says, "No, I just know what I like." And you can tell that she's responding to who he is and how he is, and he sees that in her as well. And of course, we don't necessarily get to know her as richly, but the way that their relationship plays out in the movie, for a goofy 86-minute rollerblading movie that spends its last 15 to 20 minutes on a long action sequence, yes. I actually think that their relationship is handled really well. So I think Timothée Chalamet would handle all the elements of Mitchell. I think Lily Reinhart would be a decent choice in the Brittany Powell role as Nikki, even though I think Lily Reinhart's a great actress too, and has probably been saddled with more high school roles than she needs as she works to break away from that in movies like Hustlers or something. But that was just one that came to mind. Maddie Ziegler seemed like someone who would work there as well. She was great in The Fallout. Charlie Plummer from Spontaneous came to mind, but
I love that movie.
I do too. That was my favorite movie of a couple of years ago, and I still don't think enough have caught on to how great that was. I wrote down Dylan Minnette from 13 Reasons Why, kind of cast against type a little bit as Jack, who Jack being Nikki's brother, who is very angry right away when Mitchell arrives, partially because Jack's girlfriend is making eyes at Mitchell instantly, but also because he sees the way that other people are responding to someone with the complete opposite personality as him. And I wrote down Cody Smith McPhee of The Power of the Dog as Blaine, the leader of the Preps. Maybe just because he's really tall, but that seemed like that could work too.
Okay. Did you list anybody for Wiley? I didn't catch that.
Oh yeah, you're right. I
was like, gotta have Wiley.
I think maybe when I mentioned Charlie Plummer, I think I had meant Charlie Plummer for Wiley.
Oh, okay.
Or KJ Appa, also from Riverdale, like Lily Reinhart, for Wiley too. Maybe that's just being influenced by red hair, but that seems like it would work.
All right, Matt. Last thing I want you to do is give that final pitch. Sell someone on why they should take a chance on Airborne if they haven't seen it.
I love that framing, Josh. And so I made some notes for myself because I think there are a lot of ways that people could just shrug off this movie and kind of relegate it as just like a forgotten piece of the 90s. This is just a movie about rollerblading, which is a pretty small subgenre and not one that would necessarily make a lot of people come running. The sort of Zen aspect of Mitchell's character and a lot of handful of scenes of the waves and dreaming about the perfect wave or using his dream where he has metaphor involving sharks and waves and that sort of thing. I get it. I there's a reason why people respond to things differently as adults than they do if they see something when they're 10 or 12 or something. I don't know how this movie would play to someone who had never seen it now. However, this should not be seen as a cartoonish story about blue-collar kids taking down the preps. It's a memorable story of a friendship developing between cousins and a resistant community that's opening itself up to a new way of thinking. It's an important exploration of figuring out what to fight for and what to let slide. And I think at a time with so much anger and resentment out in the world, Airborne is a fun and uniquely soothing movie about understanding and community. And that doesn't intend to oversell it by any means, only to call a spade and say that it's a great thing when a movie makes you feel something. And I think this little movie really does what it does effectively, on top of having a ridiculous but fantastic sequence of trying on clothes as Wiley tries to figure out what to wear for a date, and Mitchell is just laughing the entire time.
Yes.
Yep. And a lot of quotes that I guess I won't even spoil for people that haven't seen it before, but it's more special than it gets credit for. It's more memorable than a lot of movies that are more remembered. And I really enjoyed it as a kid, and I still like it now.
Agreed. I enjoyed it as a kid. I said I rented multiple times, and rewatching it, I was still enthralled with it. I don't know if you're familiar with Letterboxd. That's what I used to log and rate my movies. I gave it a 4-star rating because the movie's still good. 4 out of 5. I mean, that's good. That's a good rating. Nice. I was gonna bring up the changing clothes montage set to "I'm Too Sexy" by Right Said Fred. And of course, if nothing else, you just got to watch to see that end scene, that last 15-20 minute end sequence. I mean, it's worth it for that alone.
Yeah, it's really well shot. You absolutely feel the wind and the speed as they're. I don't know how any of the racers knew what the course was by any means.
Right.
It goes on for so long and they all seem to know where to go. But just when you think it's over, it still has a lot of time left, but it doesn't feel too long. It just brings you into the experience, and you wouldn't think that a movie structured this way would work, or you would sort of expect that ending part would feel tacked on, but it doesn't. I really think that this is a movie, like if you go into Airborne, if you've never seen it, or if you haven't seen it in a long time, if you go in wanting to find reasons not to like it, then you won't. But you could say that about anything. But if you can go in and just say, I know that this is a teen comedy. I know it's a fish out of water story. And yes, it's set in the world of rollerblading and hockey and roller hockey and surfing. And whether those sports mean anything to you or not, the important thing, the thing you want from any movie, the characters make an impact on you. The ones that you should like, you do like. The ones that you're not supposed to like, you don't, but not in a way that makes the movie unenjoyable. And you won't be shocked by any plot developments, but you'll be happy that you either saw it for the first time or saw it again. Just a fun movie, fun to watch, fun to talk about. I love Airborne.
All right. I think that sums it up. So that's going to wrap us up. Matt, tell everybody where they can find you, where they can find your books, shell out all that good stuff.
Thank you. So I'm just at Matt Pais, MattPais, at Matt Pais, and all the usual places. And you can find Talk 90s with me in hardcover, paperback, and ebook on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, Walmart, anywhere that you get a book, including indie bookstores through IndieBound. Grab it there.
All right. And as usual, you can find me at linktr.ee/YNFmoviepod. It'll have all the links, social media, YouTube, Letterboxd. And I'll be back in a couple of weeks. Chad and Chris are taking over for an episode, and they'll have on the guys from Pocus Hocus again. Our Valentine's Day episode, we'll be talking about the movie May from 2002. Till then, you guys take care, and I'll talk to you next time.